10 creepy mysteries you haven't heard of. This list covers mysteries that are, hopefully, not well known to most of you, but including one previously published item with updated information, and ones that have something creepy about them. I hope you enjoy the list and be sure to mention other creepy mysteries in the comments. 10. Shanti Deva. The Bhattacharya was written by Shanti Deva, a famous scholar and yogi of India in the 8th century. Shanti Deva was a prince who became a monk and studied in the legendary Nalanda University. He was always very devoted to Manjushri, the bodhisattva of wisdom. This is the story of Shanti Deva and how the Bhattacharya came to be, as told by Rinpoche. He was born in south of India. His father was a king called Kalyanvarman and his name was Shantivarman. When he was young he had great faith in Mahayana. He was generally a Mahayana type, a bodhisattva type of person. He had great respect to his teachers, was a diligent person in studies and was very helpful and always benefiting his ministers and all the subjects. He was very compassionate to the poor, sick and lowly and used to help and protect them. He was always naturally acting in the way of a bodhisattva. He also became very learned and skillful in the different arts and sciences. In his youth, he met a yogi from whom he received a teaching on Manjushri, called the sadhana of sharp Manjushri. When he practiced the sadhana he actually saw Manjushri. He had a vision of Manjushri. And so he reached a certain level of attainment. At a certain stage, his father passed away. They wanted him to become the king and wanted to enthrone him. The day before he was to be enthroned, he had a dream. In the dream he saw the big throne on which he was to be enthroned and saw Manjushri sitting on his throne. Manjushri was saying, "My son, this is my place, and I am your teacher. How can we two sit on the same seat?" This is what he saw in the dream. When he woke up he understood that it was not right to become a king. It was an indication from Manjushri that it is no use to become a king. So he fled away. He just left everything and went away. Then he went to Nalanda and met the Pandita Janadeva, who was the head teacher of Nalanda. There were 500 teachers and Janadeva was the most senior over them all. Shanti Deva became a monk under Janadeva, and so he was given the name Shanti Deva, coming from the name of his teacher. Shanti Deva studied and practiced secretly and was not showing off. He studied more inwardly and all the time he practiced on his own. He practiced on the meaning. And then he also wrote 3 great treatises. One of these 3 books is the collection of instructions, the other is the collection of the sutras, and then there is the Bhattacharya. Although he had these great qualities, he remained in the Nalanda University without doing anything. He was the laziest person. People used to call him Bhujaku. Bu comes from bhakta, which means eating. And su comes from sista, which is sleeping, and ku comes from kachaiwa, that's just walking. One who can do just eating, sleeping and going out to the toilet. So he was called Bhujaku. The people in Nalanda thought he was a disgrace to them. Everybody else was studying, giving teachings, doing something, and he was just doing nothing. He was just sleeping in his small room. So they wanted to expel him. But they couldn't find a way to expel him because he had done nothing wrong. If you don't do anything you can't do anything wrong. He didn't break any rules. He didn't do anything that was against the law. They couldn't just ask him to go away. So they tried to find a way of driving him away. Somebody had a great idea. They said, well, if we make a new system that anybody who is staying in this university has to give a teaching, then his turn will come very quickly and he wouldn't know how to teach, so he will just run away. But their plan didn't work. They asked him to give a teaching but he didn't listen to them and said, I don't know, please don't ask me, I don't know. He didn't give his consent. But then they asked his teacher to give him an order. So the teacher gave him an order. Then he said, all right, I will read something. But they wanted to really embarrass him, so they made a big throne at the center of a big field and asked everybody to come in, the whole community and from outside also. They wanted to really make him run away. But when the time came for him to give the teaching, he just sat on the throne. They didn't even know how he had come and how he had climbed up on the throne, he just was there. And then he said, "What should I read? What kind of teaching should I give? Something that has been given before or something which has never been given before?" And everybody shouted, "Something which has never been given before, of course." And Shanti Deva said, "Of these 3 teachings that I have, this one is too long, and that one is too short, so I will give you the Bhattacharya which is in the middle." Then he recited the Bhattacharya from his mind. It is said that many people saw Manjushri in front of him at that time. And when he reached the 9th chapter, the wisdom chapter, he and Manjushri rose higher and higher and disappeared. That's the usual way of describing it. He disappeared from this place. 9. Creepy Gnome. A town in South America is living in fear after several sightings of a creepy gnome that locals claim stalks the streets at night. The midget, which wears a pointy hat and has a distinctive sideways walk, was caught on video last week by a terrified group of youngsters. Teenager Jose Alvarez, who filmed the gnome, yesterday told national newspaper El Tribunal that they caught the creature while larking about in their hometown of General Gems, in the province of Salto, Argentina. He said, "We were chatting about our last fishing trip. It was 1 in the morning. I began to film a bit with my mobile phone while the others were chatting and joking. Suddenly we heard something, a weird noise as if someone was throwing stones. We looked to one side and saw that the grass was moving. To begin with we thought it was a dog, but when we saw this gnome-like figure begin to emerge we were really afraid." Jose added that other locals had come forward to say they had spotted the gnome. He said, "This is no joke. We are still afraid to go out, just like everyone else in the neighborhood now. One of my friends was so scared after seeing that thing that we had to take him to the hospital." Many cultures have legends regarding little people. The most well-known are probably the leprechauns of Ireland. Although some Irishmen have claimed to have seen these mischievous souls and probably tried to catch one, none seem to have succeeded. In other civilizations such as those in the extreme north, they refer to them as dvurgar. These dvurgar, or little people, ultimately provided the basis for Santa's elves. This legend spread throughout most Germanic tribes long before the time of Christ. Little people are not merely mythological creatures, however. Very odd. But very interesting. What sort of beings did the Buddha speak of during his years of teachings that might fit this description? The first one that comes to mind is the fairy. Now, no Buddhist scripture tells us a lot about fairies, but there is this tale. One day, while the Buddha was walking through the forest alone, Shakra, Lord of Heaven, thought, "I shall make the Tathagata an offering." He captured the most beautiful fairy ever born, and presented her to the Tathagata, that looking upon her might please the Buddha. The Tathagata refused, shaking his head, which made Lord Shakra very sad. The Buddha reached out with his left hand, and rubbed the top of the head of this king of gods, saying, "Do not be sad, friend, but you must realize, what use have I for this leathery bag of filth?" This made the Lord of Gods feel much better, as he realized that all living things will one day age, and turn to something hideous, and that a gift of a beautiful creature, such as a fairy, would be a very temporary pleasure to anyone, especially the awakened one. According to the Sun, UK story, this being was wandering around at 1:00 a.m., the darkest, quietest part of the night. In his teachings, the Tathagata spoke of yakshas, demons of earth, and rakshasas, flying demons. Like flying devils, or possibly vampires, who wandered the nights in search of food. A particular liking of these creatures was the birth fluids of humans, and the milk of human mothers. These creatures were often blamed for the sickness of children and their mothers. He even instructed nursing mothers to squirt a little of their breast milk into the air, as an offering to these poor creatures. This is to appease them, so that they do not attempt to deprive the baby of its needed nutrients. 8. Freddy Jackson's ghost. This creepy photo, taken in 1919, was first published in 1975, by Sir Victor Goddard, a retired RAF officer. The photo was a group portrait of Goddard's squadron, which had served in World War I, aboard the HMS Daedalus. An extra ghostly face appears in the photo. At the back of the airman positioned on the top row, fourth from the left, can clearly be seen the face of another man. It is said to be the face of Freddy Jackson, an air mechanic who had been accidentally killed by an airplane propeller 2 days earlier. His funeral had taken place on the day this photograph was snapped. Members of the squadron easily recognized the face as Jackson's. It has been suggested that Jackson, unaware of his death, decided to show up for the group photo. In case you don't notice the ghost, look behind the head in the inset on the left of the picture. I'm no scientist. I sometimes wish I were, but at the end of the day I'm merely an enthusiast who tries to use scientific methodology in my daily life whenever it is appropriate to do so. One aspect of science which I am keenly aware of is that it is self-correcting. When evidence appears which is contrary to the hypothesis one is testing, science demands that the new evidence be accounted for and that if the evidence is sound, the hypothesis must be amended or discarded. A few months ago I shared my research on the Freddy Jackson ghost photo, aka Goddard Squadron ghost. I have been looking into the history of this photo for some time, and with the databases I was using to search for the existence of Freddy Jackson, I did not find evidence that such a person existed. But, to my delight, a reader of that article reached out to me and he had found the very proof I had been looking for. So, to answer my own question on the matter, should we drop dead Fred? Apparently, the answer is no. There really was a Freddy Jackson in the RAF whose personal details parallel elements of the Goddard Capel story. Here is a detail of his death record. Registry number 591,269 records the death of a George Frederick Jackson, who had worked in the RAF airplane repair section. He died on April 13, 1918 at the 3rd Northern General Hospital in Sheffield. When I first got this information I was curious about why the date didn't come close to the Armistice Day, end of WWI, date that was part of Bobby Capel and Goddard's version of the story. The RAF took over Leon Solon in April of 1918. Could it be that Goddard and Capel were misremembering and that the photo was actually taken when the RAF took over in April? Perhaps this explains the variety of uniforms present. Perhaps by November when the war ended the RAF uniforms would have been more unified. Here is a reminder of what Goddard said of it in the early 1970s. Well, there he was, and no mistake, although a little fainter than the rest. Indeed he looked as though he was not altogether there, not really with the group, for he alone was capless, smiling, all the rest were serious and set and wearing service caps. Most had not long returned from church parade and marching in a military funeral. For Freddy Jackson had, upon that very spot, the squadron tarmac, 3 days before, walked heedlessly into the whirling propeller of an aeroplane. He had been killed stone dead instantly. He, evidently, was still quite unaware of it. Sir Victor Goddard. So Goddard remembered that Jackson had died instantly there on the tarmac, but the death record indicates Jackson died at the hospital, in Sheffield. Geographically observant readers may already be muttering the other salient observation here, that it is a distance of over 225 miles from the base where the photo was taken to the hospital where Jackson died. He couldn't have died simultaneously in two places so far apart. Both Goddard and Capel recollected that Jackson died right before the squadron photo. Goddard stated that he died right where the photo was taken. Jackson was in the RAF and perhaps is the very man that Bobby Capel knew, but the facts uncovered here seem to propel her story further into doubt. I suspect this ghost photo story has still got wings, and I'll update with further developments. 7. Overtoun Bridge. A series of the tragic events haunt the otherwise picturesque Overtoun Bridge near Dumbarton, Scotland, leading many to rename it the Bridge of Death. In the past 50 years, as many as 50 dogs have leapt to their deaths from the bridge, while people have also jumped and survived the nearly 50-foot plunge to the rocks below. The animals all leaped from the same spot, between the final two parapets on the right-hand side of the historic bridge. Almost all have happened on clear and sunny days, which are relatively rare for the western side of Scotland. All of the dogs that jumped have been long-nosed breeds such as collies, Labradors, and other retrievers. Stranger still, of the animals that survived their leap, some have returned and attempted to jump again. Whatever mysterious force drives these dogs to leap from Overtoun Bridge, it doesn't seem to influence just animals. In 1994, 32-year-old Kevin Moy threw his infant son Un from the bridge on a sunny day in October. The child was killed instantly, and Kevin Moy tried to follow, though he was restrained by his wife and taken to the nearby Overtoun house. There, he attempted to slash his wrists with a kitchen knife before being taken into custody. Moy, who had been suffering from depression since contracting myalgic encephalopathy 8 years before, believed that he was the Antichrist and that his infant son was Satan. He told police that he and the child were responsible for the Gulf War, and they would destroy the world by infecting humanity with the virus. He said that by killing his son and himself, he would be saving the world. A jury found Moy not guilty by reason of insanity, and he was ordered to be detained in the state hospital at Carstairs. Yet while Moy's illness may have been what drove him to commit this terrible act, the location and timing of the attempted murder-suicide, a clear, sunny day on the Overtoun Bridge, only fueled to the locale's sinister reputation. While Overtoun Bridge and nearby Overtoun House have long endured rumors of supernatural happenings, in local Celtic myth, the area is said to be a thin place where the spirit and material worlds are particularly close. Many dog lovers remain unsatisfied with spectral explanations for the rash of canine suicides. A psychic named Mary Armour went so far as to take her own Labrador for a walk across the bridge and reported no unusual sensations, only a sense of calmness and serenity, though she admitted that her dog did pull toward the right side of the bridge. Others have gone looking for more material explanations for the strange behaviors of dogs on the bridge. Some suggest the suicides are caused by a sound only audible to canines, possibly related to an acoustic anomaly in the bridge's construction. Subscribers to the theory also point to the nearby telephone pylons or the nuclear base at Fastlane as the source of the sound. Acoustic experts, meanwhile, failed to find any unusual tones that might explain the deaths. David Sexton, an animal habitat expert from the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, offers up his own solution to the mystery. Sexton discovered that 70% of dogs tested among the breeds known to jump from Overtoun Bridge react strongly to the odor of minks, animals that might be scrambling across the rocks below. This could also explain the timing of the deaths, as the smell of the minks would be strongest on dry days when damp weather doesn't interfere. While the theory is adequate for some, others remain unconvinced. They point to the unanswered questions surrounding the old bridge, like why all the deaths occur between the same two parapets, and why dogs don't leap to their deaths off other bridges in pursuit of minks. In spite of its beauty, the bridge remains a grim place for many pet lovers. Locals, too, have taken note of the mystery flowing beneath Overtoun. The site now bears a sign that warns approaching visitors to rein in their pets. Dangerous bridge, keep your dog on a lead. 6. James Worson. On September 3, 1873, James Byrne Worson, a man from Warwickshire, England, literally disappeared into thin air, leaving no trace as to how it happened, or where he went. Or so the legend goes. Worson and two friends, Barham Wise, a linen draper, and Hamerson Burns, a photographer, were returning from a local pub after a night of drinking when Worson brazenly boasted about his skill as a long-distance runner. His friends then made up their minds to challenge Worson and decided that in order for him to prove his skill, he should run, non-stop, the 40-mile distance between Leamington and Coventry that night. Worson, who was 3 sheets to the wind, did not want to embarrass himself after such conceit, and promptly accepted to the challenge. It was agreed that Wise and Burns would follow along closely behind and keep watch from their horse and cart. So the race began. Worson managed the first few miles cheerfully, laughing and carrying on animated conversation with his challengers, when unexpectedly, his footing gave way and he stumbled, falling forward to the ground and then giving out the most ungodly scream. Without any warning, before Worson had time to collide with the ground below him, he disappeared into thin air, leaving nothing behind. Burns and Wise, who were understandably stunned, hurried quickly to the nearest town to report what they had just witnessed to the authorities. They returned to the scene with scouts and searched the woods for many hours that night, and though the area was thoroughly explored in the following days, the body of James Byrne Worson was never found, nor an explanation for the manner in which he disappeared. That is to say, of course, aside from the act of disappearing altogether. This legend, often stated as fact alongside other true stories of mysterious disappearances, is most likely derived from a short story written by American author Ambrose Bierce titled An Unfinished Race, in which it is positioned as a factual retelling of the tale. This is unlikely, as the first known materialization of the strange yarn appears in Present at a Hanging and Other Ghost Stories, written by Bierce. While the legendary tale of James Worson may have a fairly lackluster explanation, the story itself retains a bit of its eeriness when juxtaposed against the rather strange disappearance of Ambrose Bierce himself. In the October of 1913, at 71 years of age, Bierce left his home in Washington, D.C. to tour the Civil War battlegrounds, eventually passing into Mexico and joining the Army of Pancho Villa as an observer, witnessing the Battle of Tierra Blanca during the Mexican Revolution. His last known correspondence with the world was in a letter written in the Mexican city of Chihuahua in December 1913, sent to friend and San Francisco journalist Blanche Partington. He closed the letter by saying, "As to me, I leave here tomorrow for an unknown destination," and from that point, was never heard from again. To date, no search has turned up any substantial clues about what exactly happened to Ambrose Bierce. Some say that he was executed by firing squad in the town of Coahuila, others that he committed suicide, and still, there are many who believe that he never went to Mexico at all. Despite the arguments about the fate of Bierce, the one thing that investigators do agree on is that he left no trace. In an odd bit of foreshadowing, Ambrose Bierce had effectively vanished into thin air, much like his literary creation of James Worson. He was never seen or heard from again. 5. The Curious Case of the Devil's Footprints, or the Great Devon Mystery of 1855. Devon, 8/February 9, 1855. Of all the strange weather stories I have read about over the last few years, I remember that of the Devil's Footprints above all. It happened exactly 160 years ago, on the night of February 8, 1855. It is a mystery of Sherlockian proportions. It remains unsolved to this day. The start of 1855 was unusually cold. The temperatures remained around freezing from January until March. Many rivers were frozen, among them the Exe and the Tein in Devon. Too cold for a thaw, each winter shower added to the massive snow, creating the conditions for the story that follows. The best place to begin is with a letter, written to the editor of the Exeter and Plymouth Gazette, Sir. Thursday night, the 8th of February 1855, was marked by a heavy fall of snow, followed by rain and boisterous wind from the east, and in the morning frost. The return of daylight revealed the ramblings of some most busy and mysterious animal, endowed with the power of ubiquity, as its footprints were to be seen in all sorts of unaccountable places, on the tops of houses, narrow walls, in gardens and courtyards, enclosed by high walls and palings, as well as in the open fields. The creature seems to have frolicked about through Exmouth, Littleham, Lumpstone, Woodbury, Topsh, Starcross, Teignmouth, and C. There is hardly a garden in Lumpstone where his footprints are not observable, and in this parish he seems to have gambled about with inexpressible activity. Its tracks appear more like that of a biped than a quadruped, and the steps are generally 8 inches in advance of each other, though in some cases 12 or 14, and are alternate like the steps of a man, and would be included between 2 parallel lines 6 inches apart. The impression of the foot closely resembles that of a donkey's shoe, and measures from 1.5 inches to, in some cases, 2.5 inches across, here and there appearing as if the foot was cleft. But in the generality of its steps the impression of the shoe was continuous and perfect, In the center the snow remains entire, merely showing the outer crust of the foot, which, therefore, must have been convex. The creature seems to have advanced to the doors of several houses, and then to have retraced its steps, but no one is able to discern the starting or resting point of this mysterious visitor. Everyone is wondering, but no one is able to explain the mystery. The poor are full of superstition, and consider it little short of a visit from old Satan or some of his imps. The print stretched for between 40 and 100 miles around the South Devon coastline, and it was the unusual cloven, hoof-like shape of the marks that suggested a link with Satan. A cloven hoof was such a well-known characteristic of the devil, a detail absorbed into popular poetry and art. Daniel Defoe had even written an essay of the extraordinary appearance of the devil, and particularly of the cloven foot. For Truman's Exeter Flying Post, the story was an excitement worthy of the Dark Ages, and they published a piece on the foot tracks of a most strange and mysterious description. In Dawlish, a group of tradesmen were so unnerved that they armed themselves with guns and bludgeons, and on the morning of 9 February set off in pursuit of the tracks. They walked from Dawlish to Luscombe, Dawlishwater and Dalclines. At length, after a very long and weary search, they returned as wise as they set out. National attention. Within a fortnight the story of the mysterious footprints was being reported in the local and national press. In particular it made its way into the Illustrated London News, the enormously popular weekly, by way of a letter from a correspondent on the footmarks on the snow in Devon. It included additional information: the marks which appeared on the snow, which lay very thinly on the ground at the time, and which were seen on the Friday morning, to all appearances were the perfect impression of a donkey's hoof, the length 4 inches by 2 3/4 inches, but instead of progressing as that animal would have done, or indeed as any other would have done, feet right and left, it appeared that foot had followed foot, in a single line, the distance from each tread being 8 inches, or rather more, the footmarks in every parish being exactly the same size, and the steps the same length. It's interesting to note here the use of the word footmarks. The word footprints had yet to find its way into the English language. Detection as an art was in its infancy, and the vocabulary of the detective remained unsettled. The letter to the Illustrated London News continued: this mysterious visitor generally only passed once down or across each garden or courtyard, and did so in nearly all the houses in many parts of several towns above mentioned, as also in the farms scattered about. This regular track passing in some instances over the roofs of houses, and hayricks, and very high walls, 14 feet, without displacing the snow on either side or altering the distance between the feet, and passing on as if the wall had not been any impediment. The gardens with high fences or walls, and gates locked, were equally visited as those open and unprotected. Now, when we consider the distance that must have been gone over to have left these marks, I must say in almost every garden, on doorsteps, through to the extensive woods of Luscombe, upon commons, in enclosures and farms, the actual progress must have exceeded 100 miles. This act of visiting homes by night also had religious undertones, stirring memories of the plague of the firstborn in Exodus, when God passed from house to house at midnight, saving only the firstborn sons of Israelites who marked their doors with lamb's blood. For some this and the cloven foot were enough to make the marks the devil's footprints, but the author of the letter in the Illustrated London News kept his mind on a rational explanation. Birds could not have left these marks, as no bird's feet leaves the impression of a hoof, or, even were there a bird capable of doing so, could it proceed in the direct manner above stated, nor would birds, even had they donkeys' feet, confine themselves to one direct line, but hop here and there. But the nature of the mark at once sets aside its being the track of a bird. The writer of the above has passed a 5-months winter in the backwoods of Canada, and has much experience in tracking wild animals and birds upon the snow, and can safely say he has never seen a more clearly defined track, or one that appeared to be less altered by the atmosphere than the one in question. He rounded off, should you think the above likely to interest your readers, or draw from any of them a better solution of this most singular occurrence than has at present been given, Perhaps you will allow it a place in your most interesting journal. This letter sparked a spate of conjecture, and the Illustrated London News, already circulating the Devon towns, were theories that the tracks were of a kangaroo, a wolf, or another beast escaped from a traveling menagerie. Theories. Letters to the newspaper from zoologists and naturalists now speculated that it was made by the hindfoot of a badger or a great bustard, or, somehow, by an errant otter or an extraordinary hopping frog. One writer ventured that the footmarks described by your Devon correspondent are made, in my opinion, by the poor, despised and insignificant rat. Another, mischievous, contribution claimed that the tracks were those of a unipede, a fabulous and rarely sighted mammal that had been spotted by the Icelandic explorer Björn Herjolfsson in Labrador in the year AD 1001. Whatever the case, today, 160 years after those Devon residents opened their doors and saw the foot tracks for the first time, we're no more enlightened than they were then. Such is the lasting mystery of the curious case of the devil's footprints. 4. Felicia Felix-Mentor. On October 24, 1936, an old naked woman with no eyelashes, and a ragged cloth around her face wandered into the village of Inari, Haiti. Panic spread through the village, and the news spread as well, and soon the Mentor family who lived just outside the village heard and investigated. It was said the strange woman was lame in her left leg, and she bore a resemblance to Felicia Felix-Mentor, who was also lame due to a fracture in her left leg. Felicia, however, had died and been buried in 1907, 29 years earlier. The woman was taken to a government hospital facility, and it was generally believed by the villagers of Inari and the Mentor family that she was indeed the returned Felicia Felix-Mentor, having been turned to a zombie and later abandoned. Famous author Zora Neale Hurston wrote of the returned Felix-Mentor as proof of the existence of zombies in Haiti, and even said that in a straightforward conversation with one of the doctors involved in the Felix-Mentor case that it had been stated there was a belief among the physicians that zombies were not the results of magic, but the results of some unknown drug that suppressed speech and free will in those exposed. Hurston took the photo of the woman reproduced here, and shared it to Life magazine, which included it in their December 13, 1937, issue, where it was accompanied by a photo spread of pictures documenting a voodoo ritual, taken by Rex Hardy Jr. Hurston then published the known story of Felix-Mentor, along with her own belief in the existence of the drug that causes the condition, in her 1938 book, Tell My Horse. Hurston's take on the situation, as well as her statements regarding the possible use of a drug to create zombies, were never taken seriously by doctors and other professionals. Hurston's previous books had shown that she had something of a taste for the fantastic, and that she was a ready believer of many folk tales she ran across, so scientists were not likely to treat her claims as credible to begin with. In 1945, Louis P. Mars, one of the doctors after whom the Centre de Psychiatrie et Neurologie Mars Klein in Port-au-Prince was later named, published an article in the anthropology journal Man, that detailed his discoveries regarding the woman being called Felicia Felix-Mentor. First off, he noted that she had been suffering from an eye disease at the time of her discovery, which had caused her eyelashes to fall out and given her extreme sensitivity to sunlight, which is why she had wrapped the ragged cloth around her head, and looked so odd. Next, he had found that X-rays showed the woman had no fracture in her left leg. Her lameness was due entirely to dietary deficiencies, as was her apparent age. Once on a well-balanced diet, the woman regained her ability to walk, and soon looked much younger than when initially found. And she also began to menstruate again, which implied she was much younger than first supposed. Therefore the physical evidence, on the basis of it, indicated she could not really be Felicia Felix-Mentor, as Felix-Mentor would actually be lame in the left leg, and noticeably older than this strange woman. Mars then also went out of his way in his article to point out that this conclusion showed that Zora Neale Hurston's belief and assertion that this woman was a typical example of zombies that existed in Haiti was mistaken and simplistic, which was unfortunate, for much of Mars' further finding about the woman may have supported her being one of the few cases of a recovered zombie, even though her original identity remained unknown. This is because in the same article, Mars stated the woman was unable to give any information about her identity, where she had been previously, or even about how she had gotten to the hospital. As he described it, all her answers were unintelligible and irrelevant. Her occasional outbursts of laughter were devoid of emotion, and very frequently she spoke of herself in either the first or the third person without any sense of discrimination. She had lost all sense of time and was quite indifferent to the world of things around her. This description was attributed by Mars to schizophrenia, but it may also be caused by a chemical alteration of normal brain activity. So this woman may have been exposed to the proposed drug that Hurston spoke of. Unfortunately, like almost every zombie examined after her, with no positive proof to show the woman had been mistaken for dead at an earlier point, there was no motivation on the part of doctors to dig deeper than necessary to explain her behavior and condition. 3. Chupas. Steve Bass is a ufologist who believes in the scientific approach to the UFO phenomenon. He is an investigator for the Mutual UFO Network, and a fellow of the Research Institute on Anomalous Phenomena based in Kharkiv, Ukraine. Bass is also a ufological and paranormal journalist for American Chronicle and UFO Digest. August 17, 2008. I look upon my writings as a method of education. Most people do not know a lot about the whole UFO phenomenon, except the humorous blurbs they hear on television news that tend to cast witnesses or researchers in a negative light, or the occasional sensationalist cable program. What I would like to accomplish is the enlightenment of as many as possible to a wealth of phenomena that really is occurring in our world involving UFOs and extraterrestrials. Please understand that these are my views based upon my research, and until we capture an alien entity in public, recover an ET spacecraft without the government's assistance, etc., my understandings can be subject to change. I roll with what feels right and with what has appropriate substantiation. Recently I have been studying a mostly Brazilian phenomenon the locals refer to as Chupas. Most things Brazilian are great, but I finally found one that is not so good. Chupas are a relatively new anomaly in the UFO arena. Most of the information about this phenomenon is derived from interviews of locals, who might be actual witnesses or can just fill in the local legends surrounding the subject. In 1977, the Brazilian government heard complaints of a phenomenon attacking locals. Witnesses described the phenomenon as small square metallic objects, a few feet on each side, that flies 20 to 30 feet off the ground, hovers, and emits a hum most described resembling that of a refrigerator. These objects fly through the treetops at night and seem to aggressively attack locals. The local economy is poor, and residents have to hunt and fish to gather food. They tend to enjoy these activities and have better results at night, when animals come out searching for prey. Chupas appear near the hunters while they are stalking through the woods or hiding in hastily made tree stands, directing a bright, focused beam of light on them. When this light hits its target, complaints of scarring that appear to be from repeated stabs by small pins accompanied by a loss of blood, not bleeding, but like a removing of a portion of the blood supply, burning of skin, and intense pain was experienced that lasted anywhere from a few weeks to years. Locals began referring to this anomaly as vampire lights or chipa, which means the sucker, as a result of the types of wounds experienced. The phenomenon seemed to appear first in the area of Para, Brazil, but soon spread to the country's capital of Belém, with complaints, attacks and injuries pouring in from local citizenry. The Brazilian military launched Operation Saucer in an attempt to identify the phenomenon. Soldiers were sent to the area to interview witnesses, examine the injured, and try to observe the phenomenon. Some of the soldiers sent to the area became witnesses themselves, with a classified 2,000-page report, photos, and almost 16 hours of film. The leading researcher into this anomaly is a fantastic ufologist named A.J. Everett, editor of Brazilian UFO magazine. Among the witnesses he interviewed was one of Ourang, the captain in charge of the military's investigation. Captain Hollanda was found dead in his home 2 months after an in-depth interview with Everett, in which he shared classified information with the ufologist. The death appeared to be a suicide, but has raised some suspicion. Quite a lot to digest. As with most UFO-related incidents, this has a lot of witness and trace evidence, but is not given very much weight by media around the world. The interesting thing here is that this is not a localized phenomenon. In the book, The Hunt for the Skinwalker, Science Confronts the Unexplained at a Remote Ranch in Utah, Dr. Colm Kelleher, Ph.D. and George Knapp record research that they and other scientists with the National Institute of Discovery Sciences conducted at an undisclosed ranch in the state of Utah, as well as other sites around the United States. Of the many anomalies recorded, Chupas were seen slowly flying around the property, emitting the same sound as described by the Brazilian locals. Are Chupas reconnaissance craft? Are the intelligences behind Chupas taking blood or tissue samples? What are they searching for? Could it be something specific to the Brazilian populace, or are they simply being preyed upon because of who they are, where they live, and how they live? Is the remoteness of the region actually a factor? Could the isolation be beneficial to their goals? Whatever the nature of Chupas, it definitely has the attention of ufologists, who continue to field reports of sightings and injuries, and press the Brazilian government to release its still classified report in toto. Until then, researchers and scientists continued their search for answers. 2. The Ourang Medan Mystery. Ominous tales of ghost ships like the Flying Dutchman and the Mary Celeste have been passed down from one generation of seafarer to the next for centuries, but as eerie as these haunted vessels are alleged to be, there is another even more disturbing maritime phenomena that deals not with ships that have been abandoned, but those whose crew have mysteriously perished. Arguably the most disturbing of all these legends is the shocking case of the SS Ourang Medan. According to widely circulated reports, in June of 1947, or, according to alternate accounts, February of 1948, multiple ships traversing the trade routes of the Straits of Malacca, which is located between the sun-drenched shores of Sumatra and Malaysia, claimed to have picked up a series of SOS distress signals. The unknown ship's message was as simple as it was disturbing: all officers including captain are dead, lying in chart room and bridge. Possibly whole crew dead. This communication was followed by a burst of indecipherable Morse code, then a final, grim message: I die. This cryptic proclamation was followed by tomb-like silence. The Silver Star comes to the rescue. The chilling distress call was picked up by 2 American ships as well as British and Dutch listening posts. The men manning these posts managed to triangulate the source of those broadcasts and deduced that they were likely emanating from a Dutch freighter known as the SS Ourang Medan, which was navigating the Straits of Malacca. A conscripted American merchant ship called the Silver Star was closest to the presumed location of the Ourang Medan. Originally christened Santa Cecilia by the Grace Line, W.R. Grace & Co., the vessel had been renamed the Silver Star when the United States Maritime Commission drafted it in 1946. Noting the terrified urgency and the message that came over the airwaves, the captain and crew of the Silver Star wasted no time in changing their course in an effort to assist the apparently incapacitated ship. Within hours, the Silver Star caught sight of the Ourang Medan rising and falling in the choppy waters of the Malacca Strait. As the merchant craft neared the ill-omened vessel, the crew noticed that there was no sign of life on the deck. The Americans attempted to hail the Dutch crew to no avail. That's when the captain of the Silver Star decided to assemble a boarding party. As they left the safe haven of the Silver Star, these unfortunate souls had no idea that they were about to walk into a living nightmare. As soon as they boarded the Ourang Medan, the men swiftly realized that the distress calls were not an exaggeration. The decks of the vessel were littered with the corpses of the Dutch crew, their eyes wide, their arms grasping at unseen assailants, their faces twisted into revolting visages of agony and horror. Even the ship's dog was dead, its once intimidating snarl frozen into a ghastly grimace. The boarding party found the captain's remains on the bridge, while his officers' cadavers were strewn about the wheelhouse and chart room. The communications officer was still at his post, as dead as the rest, his fingertips resting on the telegraph. All of the corpses, according to reports, bore the same terrified, wide-eyed expressions as the crew on deck. Below deck, search party members found categories of corpses in the boiler room, but almost as disturbing as this grim find was the fact that the American crew members claimed to have felt an extreme chill in the nadir of the hold, even though the temperature outside was a scorching 110 degrees Fahrenheit. While the search team could see clear evidence that the crew of the Ourang Medan suffered profoundly at the moment of their deaths, they could find no overt evidence of injury or foul play on the swiftly decaying corpses. Nor could they spy any damage to the ship itself. The captain of the Silver Star decided that they would tether themselves to the Ourang Medan and tow it back to port, but as soon as the crew attached the tow line to the Dutch ship they noticed ominous billows of smoke pouring up from the lower decks, in specific the number 4 hold. The boarding party scarcely had a chance to cut the tow line and make it back to the Silver Star before the Ourang Medan exploded with such tremendous force that it lifted herself from the water and swiftly sank. The crew watched the Dutch vessel disappear beneath the briny depths, no doubt breathing deep sighs of relief that the tow line had not dragged them into the sea as well. The watery grave that claimed the Ourang Medan effectively removed the freighter from the face of the earth and forced it directly into the realm of myths and legends. This, of course, has made it one of the most enduring and intriguing maritime mysteries of the modern age, leaving us to ask the most basic question. What happened to the Ourang Medan? While rumors about the Silver Star's grisly discovery circulated wildly along the trade routes of the East Indies, the first official account of the event would not be printed until May of 1952, in the form of the Proceedings of the Merchant Marine Council, which was published by the United States Coast Guard. The testimony therein described the alarming state of the Dutch crewmen, even going so far as to state, their frozen faces were upturned to the sun, staring, as if in fear. The mouths were gaping open and the eyes staring. The ship that never was. The first problem with trying to ascertain what happened to this now infamous Dutch freighter is the fact that there doesn't seem to be any official records that it ever existed in the first place. We know that the Silver Star was real, although, by 1947, it had been reacquired by the Grace Line Shipping Company who dubbed the vessel Santa Juana, but there's no paper trail leading to the Ourang Medan. Some researchers have speculated that if the Ourang Medan was a genuine ship that it likely hailed from Sumatra, which at the time was a colony of the Netherlands in what was referred to as the Dutch East Indies. Ourang is Indonesian for man and Medan is the biggest city on the island of Sumatra, which would designate this enigmatic freighter the man from Medan. But, while the etymology of the name might give some clue as to its origin, there are no bureaucratic records of the Ourang Medan. Author and historian Roy Bainton, who's done some of the most exhaustive and revealing investigation on the subject of the SS Ourang Medan, met dead end after dead end in his pursuit of the true story of the death ship. First he went to the usual sources, but was unable to find any mention of the ship in Lloyd's shipping registers or the Dictionary of Disasters at Sea, 1824 to 1962. Then he contacted the United Kingdom Admiralty, the Registrar of Shipping and Seamen and the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich, all of whom told him that the only place to check Dutch shipping records was in Amsterdam. Bainton searched the Dutch records as well as the Maritime Authority in Singapore to no avail. Just as he was about to give up his investigation and write the whole thing off as just an old sailor's yarn, Bainton was contacted by Professor Theodor Seersdorfer of Essen, Germany, who had been pursuing the case for the better part of 50 years and was the first to reveal the names of the 2 American ships that had heard the Ourang Medan's SOS calls. Seersdorfer also led Bainton to a 32-page German booklet written in 1954 by Otto Mielke, entitled Des Todesschiffen der Südsee, or Death Ship in the South Sea. Mielke seemed to know a lot about the Ourang Medan's route, cargo, tonnage and engine power and even, allegedly, the captain's name. One is forced to wonder whether or not Mielke had contact with one of the Silver Star's notoriously difficult-to-find crewmen. Mielke's pamphlet was also the source of the June 1947 date and added yet another compelling piece to the puzzle, which helped to reignite Bainton's interest in the project. This intriguing new bit of possible evidence was that the number 4 hold of the Ourang Medan may have been filled with a pair of exceedingly lethal and highly illegal substances. According to Benton, there is a tantalizing, possible explanation as to her crew's demise and her disappearance from the records. Mielke mentions a mixed, lethal cargo on the Dutchman's alkali, potassium cyanide, and nitroglycerine. Needless to say, this would be a dangerous enough concoction in a laboratory with the highest safety protocols, but in a cargo hold on the rough seas it was a potential nightmare, one which might explain not only the inexplicable demise of the Dutch crew, but the subsequent explosion that claimed the freighter herself. Even more terrifyingly, according to Benton, is the conjecture that the Ourang Medan may have been smuggling nerve gas or even more insidious biological weapons manufactured by a sinister assembly of Japanese scientists whose experiments were so heinous that many of the atrocities perpetrated by the Nazis in the name of science pale by comparison. This diabolical faction was unassumingly referred to as Unit 731, known to nearby inhabitants as a den of cannibals. Unit 731 was founded in 1932 by a brilliant, yet misguided, Japanese bacteriologist named Shiro Ishii. The unit was designed to be a clandestine research and development department whose sole agenda was to create the most deadly forms of chemical and biological weapons known to man and thus ensure the victory of the Japan over any potential enemy. Ishii established Unit 731, code-named Tongo Unit, during the Second Sino-Japanese War, but didn't really make his terrible mark until he oversaw the construction of new research facilities in the Imperial Japanese Army-occupied Pingfang district of Harbin, China. It was there that the scientists of his division conducted some of the most deplorable biological experiments known to mankind during World War II. Even more inexcusable was the fact that this grotesque cabal used human beings, including women and infants, in their appalling experiments, which included everything from exposure to sub-zero temperatures to the vivisection of human guinea pigs to study the effects of toxic materials on living organs. Nevertheless, General Douglas MacArthur, presumably in the interest of national defense, covertly granted immunity to Ishii and his staff in exchange for providing the U.S. with their biological warfare research, regardless of the unspeakable acts they had committed, the magnitude of which was reported by Benton. Unit 731's brief was to find a chemical, gas or biological weapon to win the war. Hideous, inhumane experiments were carried out on helpless Australian, American, Russian, Chinese and British prisoners, some of the worst war crimes ever committed. As to why these hazardous materials were packed onto the Ourang Medan when they could have just flown it directly to a secretive laboratory, Benton speculated that perhaps the U.S. government, or another world power, decided to use as slow and inconspicuous vessel as the Dutch freighter to transport such treacherous cargo for reasons of both safety and concealment. So how was this deadly cargo moved around the South China Sea and through the Straits of Malacca during this troubled period? Not by air. The prospect of a cargo plane crashing with several tons of deadly gas on board was too horrendous to consider. No, you hired an insignificant toll tram steamer, preferably with a low-paid foreign crew, stowed the cargo in disguised oil drums and, like all serious smugglers, hoped for the best, and a blind eye from authority. Benton surmised that sea water could have entered the ship's hold, reacting with the perilous cargo to release poisonous gases, which then caused the crew to suffocate. At this point the onrushing salt water might have reacted with the nitroglycerin, creating the explosive effect that was said to cause the ship's ultimate demise. Benton even went on to speculate as to why the United States would go to such extreme lengths to expunge from all records the very existence of the freighter, if we accept, due to the nature of her crew's deaths, that she was carrying deadly gas or chemicals, and if indeed she was a Dutch vessel. Had this news broken, it would have been a major embarrassment for any government involved, especially in the light of the Geneva Convention. Hence the dead ends faced by any researcher. The story exists because, like the gases, it escaped. So are we to believe that this was the ultimate fate of the Ourang Medan and her crew? Was this merely a tragic accident that was the result of combining dangerous chemicals with nitroglycerine on rough seas? If this is a genuine account of what transpired, then it seems like it's as valid a possibility as any, but that doesn't mean it's the only option that researchers have come up with. Perhaps the strangest I've encountered is that the unfortunate crew was the victim of the paranormal. In 1953, Frank Edwards and Robert V. Hulse retold the basics of the legend for Fate magazine, and in his 1955 book The Case for the UFO, astronomer, author and noted Philadelphia experiment researcher, Morris K. Jessup, hypothesized that the crew of the Ourang Medan may have been attacked by extraterrestrials for reasons unknown. Other 14 enthusiasts have theorized that the unlucky Dutch crew may have had a Scooby-Doo-like run-in with vengeful wraiths of the sea or a ghost ship full of surly, undead pirates. The dubious proof, which supporters of the paranormal option use to confirm their theory, is the evident lack of a natural cause for the deaths, as well as the purportedly petrified expressions etched onto the faces of the doomed sailors. Add to this the unnatural chill in the cargo hold and the assertion that some of the deceased sailors were reaching up towards what was assumed to be an unknown adversary, and you have all the ingredients for a hoary seafarer's tale. This is scant evidence indeed for a supposed interaction with either evil aliens or malevolent phantoms, but one can hardly blame yarn-spinning mariners for trying to add a little spice to a story told around campfires on stony shorelines to wide-eyed children, or even novice deckhands. So, if we presume for the moment that the paranormal is out, then we must be dealing with natural causes. Okay, assuming that the deaths aboard the Ourang Medan were caused by neither supernatural forces or atrocious weapons of war, then could it be a chilling natural phenomenon or even a simple accident that claimed the lives of those Dutch sailors? Mayhap an incident involving methane bubbles. Perhaps the most fear-provoking theory proffered by those who believe that the demise of the Dutch freighter was explicable by natural means is that the crew of the Ourang Medan was asphyxiated by clouds of noxious methane that gurgled up from a fissure on the seafloor and poisoned the sailors before eventually engulfing the ship. As terrifying as the thought of random bursts of methane destroying vessels after killing the crew may be, this explanation seems far-fetched, as it does not account for the thunderous blast described by the crew of the Silver Star. So if it wasn't methane bubbles that were responsible for the tragedy, then perhaps it was a boiler fire. Author Vincent Gaddis, in his 1965 book Invisible Horizons, put forward the premise that an unobserved fire or failure in the ship's boiler system might have been responsible for the demise of the vessel. He claimed that carbon monoxide could have leaked up, causing the deaths of all aboard while the fire slowly grew, eventually igniting the fuel and causing the craft to explode. While this is a sound theory, perhaps the truth is even simpler than a fire or a maintenance error, and all of this is nothing more than a hoax. Despite Benton's proposition that the records may have been eradicated by a savvy group of governmental conspirators, the fact that there are no registration records for the Ourang Medan remains a troublesome detail. Combine this with the reality that no survivors of the Silver Star have ever felt compelled to come forward and tell their harrowing tale, and you've got all the earmarks of a good, old-fashioned ghost story concocted by sailors to while away the long hours at sea. That having been stated, the fact that the United States Coast Guard seems to have confirmed the tale, and that other noted nautical authors have invested so much time and so many resources in availing themselves of the truth, lends an aura of credibility to the whole proceeding. Conclusion: when all is said and done, if anyone really knows what happened to the Ourang Medan and her crew, then they're not talking. But whatever the truth is behind this unfathomable tragedy, it remains one of the most perplexing and downright scary maritime enigmas of the 20th century. And while it might not be as famous as the plethora of other ghost ships said to sail the high seas, it is every bit as terrifying. To this day, the exact fate of the Ourang Medan and her crew remains a mystery. 1. Jeff. One morning in the early 1930s, James Irving of the village of All beyond the Isle of Man was getting ready to open his daily newspaper, when a high-pitched disembodied voice called out impatiently, "Read it out, you fat-headed gnome." The voice didn't belong to Irving's wife Margaret or his teenage daughter Voyery, the only humans likely to be in the remote farmhouse, but though Irving may have been offended, he wasn't surprised. He knew the voice belonged to a strange creature called Jeff, who, for some time, had been living, largely unseen, in his family's home. The mysterious creature first showed up in the Irving residence sometime in 1931, and, according to the accounts of James, Margaret, and Voyery, initially lived in the walls and, not yet able to speak, imitated a range of animal noises. Quickly, the unseen entity started to pick up human language from the Irvings, and, before long, introduced itself to the family. His name, he said, was Jeff, pronounced Jeff, and he was a mongoose from India. Over the course of the 1930s, Jeff the Talking Mongoose became something of a media phenomenon. He appeared in numerous tabloid newspaper stories, and was investigated by paranormal researchers. Though many visitors wrote off Jeff, occasionally spelled Jeff and Jeff, as some kind of hoax or mass hallucination, the Irving family insisted he was real. They told stories of Jeff sleeping in Voyery's room, eating bacon and sausages, and even riding the bus and bringing back gossip about the neighbors. The family members all claimed to have seen Jeff at some point with their own eyes, and in a 1932 interview with the Manchester Daily Dispatch, James described the creature as a little animal resembling a stoat, a ferret, or a weasel, yellow in color with a body about 9 inches long. Its long bushy tail is speckled with black. PDF. The Irving family's descriptions of Jeff seemed to shift from that of a real, corporeal mongoose to something of a sprite, who, though verbally active, and possibly telekinetic, was rarely seen. Jeff's own accounts of himself also varied. At one point he described himself as merely an extra clever mongoose. But at another, he proclaimed, "I'll split the atom. I am the 5th dimension. I am the 8th wonder of the world." They accused Jeff of throwing stones, killing rabbits, and singing bawdy renditions of Home on the Range. The talking mongoose's little speeches, meanwhile, veered from rude, "I have been to nicer homes than this. Carpets, piano, satin covers on polished tables. I am going back there. Ha ha ha," to terrifying, "I could kill you all, but I won't." Though only one newspaper claimed to have actually seen Jeff, in an article called Man Weasel Mystery Grips Island, Queerest Beast Talks the Daily Dispatch reporter, some members of the media took the case seriously enough to launch a full investigation. Rex Lambert, founding editor of the BBC's Listener magazine, took on the mongoose mystery with celebrity paranormal investigator Harry Price, and the two published their findings in a book called The Haunting of Cashin's Gap, A Modern Miracle Investigated, 1936. Lambert and Price emerged from their investigation skeptical of Jeff's existence. Hair samples allegedly plucked from Jeff were analyzed, and determined to belong to a longish-haired dog. Clay imprints of Jeff's paws, meanwhile, lacked the irregular texture of an animal's skin, and zoological experts suggested they were probably carved with a stick. Price speculated that Voyery could have been using ventriloquism to create Jeff's voice. Though the case could have ended there, it didn't. Over the years Jeff has faded away, but has never been fully forgotten. First, Lambert, who is probably best remembered for his incorrect predictions about the future of television, including, "Television won't matter in your lifetime or mine," nearly lost his job when retired Colonel Sir Cecil Levitt alleged that his coverage of the Jeff story meant he was off his head. Lambert responded to the allegation by bringing a slander suit, referred to as the Mongoose case, against Levitt, which he eventually won. Second, the eternal human fascination with talking animals has ensured that Jeff still has a few die-hard fans. In 2014, according to the Wall Street Journal, the world's preeminent authorities on Jeff gathered in the University of London Senate House Library to discuss the Great Mongoose Mystery. In addition to predictable speculation about who or what Jeff was, and whether he existed, some investigators took a more academic approach to the Jeff mystery. Richard Espley, director of the library's English language collection, for instance, argued that Jeff's story was part of a larger trend of talking animals in oral histories, dating back as far as the Panchatantra, a collection of ancient Indian animal fables, which he described as the mongoose narrative. Though the mystery of Jeff may never be satisfyingly solved, the talking mongoose does seem to fit into a broader history of talking animal legends, which appear in everything from ancient texts like the Bible and the Panchatantra to more recent pop culture phenomena, like the spate of YouTube videos featuring talking dogs. In an article on the psychological roots of the talking animal myth, Ian notes, speaking animals provide us with the potential of an entirely different world, a world that is reminiscent of our own, even familiar, and yet still uncanny enough to maintain the fantasy. Maybe the legend of Jeff the talking mongoose was a collective fantasy, the product of a basic human desire for otherworldly wonder and magic. But then again, maybe Jeff really was what he claimed to be, an extra clever mongoose.